Good morning, everybody. I hope you're well. I hope you can hear me. Just been testing out Rebecca's Zoom. Thank you for joining us for this independent retail promotion training. Obviously, we don't have wines to show, but the idea is to give you some key facts and interesting points to note about New Zealand wine, kind of like an NZ101 for you. And we are recording this so we can pass it, you can pass it around afterwards to your staff. We're aiming it to last 30 minutes, 45 minutes max. Depends on how many questions you ask, so do feel free to use your chat to ask. I've got a quick update just about the promotion at the very end, but only a couple of slides. But in the meantime, handing over to our guru of New Zealand, Rebecca Gibb.
Thanks, Chris. I hope everyone's well this morning. I'm not, full of cold, so apologies for my slightly nasal tone. I also have a child who has a cold from school, so that's a marvellous preparation for me. What's going to happen today is I'm going to just go over a little bit of history, geography, give you a better feel for New Zealand, get you hopefully a bit more excited about selling New Zealand wines, hopefully give you some tips and things that you can tell your customers in store or potentially in newsletters, that you can spread the word about New Zealand wine while selling it. And perhaps at the end we're going to go through through the varieties as well. So I'm going to give you a little overview of the varieties and what they taste like in situ. The chat function is working, so please feel free to hop on the chat. It's on the three dots at the top if you're not familiar with Zoom. If you want to ask questions there, and I will do my best to answer any questions that you may have. Please, there are no stupid questions. If you've got any questions at all, send them my way. If you're really enjoying the presentation, you can get on the social. We're NZ Wine, hashtag NZ Wine, NZ Made with Care. That's right, isn't it, Chris? And it's at NZ Wine Europe, and I'm at Rebecca Gibb on the old Twitter. Please don't take any pictures of me when I'm mid-speech and then post them on Instagram. I have got some absolute shockers of me midway through a sentence. I look like I'm sneezing, and quite frankly, at the moment, I am doing quite a lot of sneezing, so I don't need to be reminded. Anyway, so this is a beautiful picture at the opening of our presentation. This is Man-o-War, and this is on a place called Ponui Island. It's a tiny, tiny island. There's like one farmer lives on there with a load of donkeys. And it's just a few hundred meters off Waiheke Island, which is 40 minutes boat ride from Auckland. And it's just such a beautiful picture, and I think that really encapsulates what New Zealand is all about. It's the beauty of the place, it's the pristine landscapes, which I hope that you find is reflected in the wines. And I think that as we are stuck in our homes, wherever that may be, wherever you are in the country, feel free to say good morning, tell us where you're from, what merchant you're from, or what you're hoping to get out today, or just say good morning to let me know whereabouts. I'm based up in the northeast of England, as you can tell from my accent, but I did live in New Zealand for 6 years, and it's looking pretty idyllic right now, being based up in the northeast of England when everyone else in New Zealand is having a good time, COVID-free. Without further ado, let's go for it. So where is New Zealand? We have already slipped slide. Where is New Zealand? Okay, well, I'm sure that you're all aware that New Zealand is a bloody long way away. But on this map, we have put it at the centre of the earth. I thought that New Zealand wasn't as far away as it was the first time I ever went. I went and did harvest in Australia in 2006, and thought that, just before the harvest would start, I'd hop over to New Zealand just for a quick trip. Now, the distance between London and Moscow is the same distance as it is between Sydney and Auckland. So you can expect a 4-hour flight between Sydney and Auckland. So we are not that close. New Zealand is a long way from anywhere. And in the next slide, I'm going to describe to you how that affects the climate and the wines. Okay, so here is a close-up of the half-eaten lamb chop. That is New Zealand. As you can tell from the previous map and this one, it is a very remote place. And To the west, we have the Tasman Sea, which separates New Zealand from Australia. To the east, you've got the South Pacific. It's about a 12-hour flight from Auckland to Santiago. There's a direct flight that you can take. But basically, you do not cross land until you get to Chile. It is a long way. So as a result, the climate in New Zealand is unsurprisingly maritime. We don't have massive differences, particularly close to the coast. Because of that sea influence also, you find that the latitude in the southern hemisphere in New Zealand doesn't really reflect the latitude that you might find, say, in Europe. So Marlborough, as I've said here, is on the same latitude as Rome, but you don't see a lot of Frascati being made. And that's because New Zealand is surrounded by water. So that's cooling, making a cooling influence. Hawke's Bay, which you can see on the east coast of the North Island, is on about the same latitude as Sardinia, but it's not making any Vermentina or any Cannonau just yet, although global warming, who knows. Instead, you've got a sort of more of a climate that's similar to, say, Bordeaux in terms of statistics. So that cooling influence of both the Pacific and the cooling influence of the Tasman is really making a massive difference to the climate of New Zealand, making it much cooler than its latitude would suggest. I'm sure you're all going to tell all your customers that when they come in for a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc. Because the prevailing winds come off the Tasman and hit the west coast is very wet compared to the east coast. So it's unsurprising that most of the vineyards are situated on the east coast. There is a spine of mountains that run the length of the South Island, and that's called, imaginatively, the Southern Alps. And most of the rain falls on the Alps and often in snow. It's really great skiing in Central Otago. And so you get the dry east coast. So whereas you might get, say, up to 6 meters, say in Milford Sound, which is about 3 hours drive west of Queenstown, right at the bottom of the South Island, when you get to the east coast, say in Marlborough, you're only getting like 70 centimetres. So big difference there. You don't want to be making wine on the west coast of New Zealand because your grapes are going to rot. You might think of New Zealand as being a cool climate, and to some extent you are correct. The South Island of New Zealand, yes, it is a cool climate. But when you get to the North Island, when you get sort of Hawke's Bay and above, we're talking a much warmer climate here. We're talking temperate climate in Hawke's Bay and in Gisborne. But once you get to Auckland above, in Northland, for example, it's almost subtropical. So you shouldn't always think of New Zealand as being one size fits all. There are many climates within the country, and we can make Sauvignon Blanc and we'll make Pinot Noir on the South Island. But when it gets to Hawke's Bay and above, we're looking at red wines that are made. So we're looking at, as we'll see later, Syrah, Cabernet blends. We're also looking at Chardonnay, even Viognier, for example. I'm going to do a short bit of history here just to put New Zealand in the context of the rest of the world. Now, New Zealand is only 1% of the world's wine production. I was researching it for another presentation, and it turned out that in terms of size of country, New Zealand's actually, I think, 30th or 31st in the OIV's list of wine producing countries in terms of size. It sits between Mexico and Uruguay. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking you ain't selling a lot of Uruguayan and Mexican wine at the moment. I'm thinking you're probably going to be selling a little bit more New Zealand wine. Well, I would hope so with this promotion upcoming. So while the Argentines and the Chileans were making wine as early as the mid-1500s, thanks to the missionaries who came from like Spain and Portugal, it was actually 1819 when a Yorkshireman, in fact, planted the first vines in New Zealand, and he planted them very close to this spot that you see pictured in this slide. You'll see a cross down here, and that's actually Marsden's cross, and it's named in honor of Samuel Marsden, who was a missionary. He came over in 1816, and he had the first Christian service right where that cross is. 3 years later, he brings over some vines over from Australia, and they plant them nearby in a town called Kerry, which is in Northland, that really at the top of the North Island, where I said earlier it's subtropical, not ideal for grapes, but people are still doing it, some with some success. So New Zealand is really late to the party when it comes to vines, and nothing really gets going for a while until 1851, when you've got the first vines planted by French missionaries in Hawke's Bay. And these missionaries created Mission Estate, and Mission Estate is still running to this day. However, the problem is with New Zealand, people coming to New Zealand in the late 19th century, early 20th century, is that people who are emigrating there, they're Brits. And while we love wine, we are traditionally not the biggest wine culture. We don't have a wine culture really. We traditionally drank beer, and the Scots, who made a big impact on immigration in New Zealand, were whiskey swillers. So there isn't a wine culture in New Zealand, unlike, say, when you look at Chile and Argentina, Spanish. You look at Australia, lots of German Silesians brought over their wine culture as well as their vines. There isn't really a wine culture. And much to our disappointment, the Brits love to binge drink, and that was even a fact 150 years ago. And so it's starting to become a social problem in the late 19th century in New Zealand. And there's a growing temperance movement. People are like, no, we don't want this happening. It's like there's a growing temperance movement, which leads to a national prohibition vote in 1919. The country votes to go dry, much like America did in the same year. However, at that time there are more than 40,000 troops stationed overseas post-World War I, and they get a vote as well. And because they have been exposed to wine culture in France and Italy and Germany at that time, they've seen that actually wine culture can actually be cafe culture. It can actually be very civilized. And three out of 4 of those troops, they voted to stay wet. And because of those votes, New Zealand stayed wet. And during the promotional period, actually, it's Anzac Day, which is kind of the equivalent of our November the 11th. And I think it's on the 25th or 25th of April. I think 25th or 26th of April. And so you might want to look that up and see what Anzac troops did actually for New Zealand wine. That might be something you want to tie in. I don't know. But basically, as a result of that, New Zealand really struggles to get a wine industry going because there has been this really strong temperance movement. We are quite abstemious, and it wasn't until 1987 that actually, when you voted in a general election, there was still a question whether you wanted New Zealand to go dry or not. So, this is, in the last 30 years, it's really, New Zealand wine has taken off. It's really taken until Marlborough's first vine, not till 1973, Central Otago's first Pinot, not till 1987. This is a very young winemaking country. And as you can see from the statistics just in the left-hand corner that I've just brought up here, New Zealand wine industry has grown exponentially in the last 20 years. It's been really, really rapid. So very much a lovely statistical slide here, which we won't spend long on. I like the history better myself. I love a story. But as you can see here, that Marlborough really dominates the wine growing landscape here. It's almost 70% of plantings are in Marlborough. Hawke's Bay officially is the second largest wine growing region in New Zealand, on about 12%. But if you split Marlborough up into its 2 big regions of the Arwatry Valley and the Wairau Valley, they would be number 1 and number 2, and Hawke's Bay would be in 3rd. That's how big it is. Obviously, everyone else is making up the numbers, but they're not making up the numbers in terms of quality, I'm happy to say. Comes to key varieties, I don't think it will be surprising you here that Sauvignon Blanc is the most important grape variety in the ground in New Zealand, making up around 60% of plantings. So, but from this, you can think that it seems that New Zealand is much more diverse than perhaps what we see on shelves, typically in the supermarkets, damn you supermarkets. But basically, 86% of the wines that are exported from New Zealand port Sauvignon Blanc. So what's been exported and what's actually in the ground, there is a little bit of a disparity there. So hoping that over this promotional period that we can show you and you can show your customers that there is more to New Zealand Blanc. Well, New Zealand makes excellent Sauvignon Blanc, but there is more diversity there in both the regional perspective and from both and a grape perspective as well. Just going to have a little drink because when I talk, I get mouth dry mouth. Talk amongst yourselves. You're all on mute. So I want to talk to you now about New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. I'm going to give you a little bit of history science, but I want to give you a couple of nuggets that you can maybe take away and share with your customers, or maybe get you excited about it. So the success of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc has come about because it is different to most of the Sauvignon Blancs that you get in the rest of the world, and this has been proved by science. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc from the South Island is cool climate. So it's always going to be fresh, it's going to be crisp, it's going to be perfect for summer and spring drinking. It is a great aperitif. But New Zealand also has this incredible aromatic profile. And where does that come from? Well, I think it's partly the climate. It has a cool climate. It's got a similar, in terms, if you compared Sancerre to say Marlborough, for example, you would see that the temperatures, rainfall, quite similar during the seasons, not much in it. But what really separates New Zealand from, say, Sancerre is the amount and intensity of light. New Zealand receives about 2,500 hours of sunlight, whereas Sancerre gets 1,800. So it's almost a third more sunlight in that period. It's incredible. So you can almost taste the sunlight, that bright luminosity in the wines. I think what you're getting also is you're getting that extra ripeness. So you're seeing wonderful passion fruit characters and really ripe tropicals, but you're also retaining that cool greener edge, that maybe capsicum or maybe that nettle or grassy character that's coming from the cool climate. Scientists have spent a lot of time looking at Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc has become such a massive part of the New Zealand wine industry, and they found that the levels of, obviously you get your methoxypyrazines, but the levels of thiols, which are responsible for those tropicals, are kind of off the scale compared to other Sauvignon producing regions. And that's what really separates them. So it's all about that's tropical, the passion fruit, the boxwood, really vibrant styles. They've also found that machine harvesting actually increases that aromatic exuberance. So now you might not see this has been lovingly machine harvested on the back of a wine label, but in fact that actually enhances that aromatic profile. So you're always going to get fresh, fruity yet green. You're always going to have your mouth is always going to water after you've had a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. That said, we're talking classical, stereotypical Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc that has made it famous. I'm sure as independent wine retailers that you have a range of New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs. We're not just talking about the fresh, fruity, exuberant styles. There are a lot of newer styles emerging. You're seeing barrel ferments, you're seeing wild ferment, you're seeing time on lees, you're seeing lots of people hand harvesting to reduce those thiols, which give that massive exuberance. We're seeing a greater restraint in styles, we're seeing more organic wines, and I'm sure that you'll see that on your shelf. So basically if you're willing to pay, if you're willing to pay over and above £13 for a Sauvignon Blanc, which some people aren't willing to do, I'm sure, but they should be, you can have a whole different taste experience from sort of £13 and up with these different techniques that are coming in to show a different, more restrained style of Marlborough. It's not all about Marlborough. Also, there are different regions. Just across the Cook Strait, on the bottom of the North Island, you have Martinborough and the Wairarapa. You're going to get a little bit more restraint in these regions. You're going to get a bit more of a grassy profile, less exuberant. Similarly, if you drive 2 miles west of Marlborough to Nelson, you will find small producers there who are making more restrained styles as well. And in Nelson, they did study and actually found, this is a bit nerdy, but they've actually did a study of yeast strains, and they found that in Nelson there's a particular yeast strain that creates like a really appley character. It's actually it creates less exuberant styles, and that's actually a regional identifier in Nelson. Nelson is also great. If you've also got any Nelson wines on your list, I think one of the wonderful things to do is talk about, you know, this is the place, this is a really liberal place. It's very much hippies and artists. It's a really laid back place to go. It's all about lifestyle. If you want, it's a brilliant place to visit. If you're going on holiday, they've got two of the great walks in New Zealand, the Abel Tasman Track and the Heafy Track. This is a place to go and chill out. When you get to, they have a few smatterings of Sauvignon Blanc down in central Otago and the rest of the country too. They do even have some on the warmer parts of the North Island in Hawke's Bay, but you're getting a much softer style. So if people don't want that exuberance, you might want to suggest to them they might want to go to the Wairarapa or Nelson, or if they want a softer, less acid, high in acid style, you can go to the warmer Hawke's Bay. Let's talk. Anyone got any questions about Sauvignon Blanc before I, race on? You are very welcome to ask me. Or not, feel free to. I'm going to keep on talking. If I see any questions, then, or if I'm talking too fast, let me know. Chardonnay, is it New Zealand's signature variety? Well, Jancis claims that it should be, and sometimes I'm kind of in agreement with her. Actually, Chardonnay was New Zealand's most important grape variety between 1996 and 2002. It enjoyed a short period in the sun. It took over from Muller Turgau, which was New Zealand's most prolific variety until 1996. Oh dear, sorry, someone's just joined. Yes, it was New Zealand's most prolific variety until 1996. And Chardonnay took over for 6 years until Sauvignon Blanc took off and then has grown sixfold since 2002. What I want to say in terms of qualitative qualities, there's a question here. Thank you very much, Rizzo. Is the very distinct profile from Marlborough linked with specific yeast strains used to put in those flavours? In small part, yes. There are some people do use specific yeast strains to emphasize those thiols and characters. It's for sure. However, it has been found that without those yeast strains, the actual Marlborough character, the thiols in Marlborough are actually so high compared to any other region, including other New Zealand wine regions, that that distinct profile is actually quite unique. It is unique to Marlborough, but you can enhance that for sure with your techniques in the winery. Go back to Chardonnay. So I think that when I think about New Zealand, well, most people think about New Zealand Chardonnay, the first thing they think of is Kumeu River. Everyone has it listed, and I find it quite entertaining actually. I know I've got a few people who I work with, and they tell me that they go around the retail world and they say, no, it's got to be exclusive. Or to merchants, like, it's got to be exclusive to us. And then I look around and I see everyone having Kumeu River, and I said, but that's not exclusive to you. It's very strange. What I want to do, I think Kumeu River is an absolutely exceptional Chardonnay. It truly is. But there are other truly exceptional Chardonnays in New Zealand. We just have to dig a little bit deeper. The thing is about New Zealand Chardonnay as well is that you can excel both on the South Island and the North Island. You can go as far down to Felton Road in central Otago, and you can go up to Hawke's Bay. You can go up to, this is the Rifleman's Vineyard from Sacred Hill. This is in Hawke's Bay. You can make exceptional Chardonnay in many parts of New Zealand. It really does have a climate that is consistent with making excellent Chardonnay of different styles. Marlborough, for example, has a quite similar climate to Burgundy. Okay, stick with me here. So like the seasonal temperatures are almost the same, like 15.1 versus 15.2 degrees. Like growing degree days are almost the same. They get the same rainfall. Okay, Burgundy is in France, in continental France. Marlborough is in maritime Marlborough. Yeah, I appreciate that, but they do have a lot of similarities in that respect. And so it's a cool dry place to grow Chardonnay, and it really does excel. In the past, yes, New Zealand Chardonnay has sometimes been a bit obvious, but people have only been doing it for 20, 30 years. The Burgundians have been at it for hundreds of thousands. Give us a break. But things have really speeded up in the last sort of decade. People are going for picking at lower alcohols, mallow. They know how to handle it now, so you don't get that creamy buttery character caused by diacetyl. Oak, much more sensitive. Not throwing oak at it, and also. 20 years ago, oxygen was seen as the enemy of winemaking in New Zealand. It's all about stainless steel, very clean, very pure. But now it's all right to, have a little bit of oxygen to just, allow things to go through. And one of the things other people are doing is they're not cleaning up their juice before it goes into a barrel for barrel fermentation. They allow in some solids, which is giving greater texture. It's giving greater aromatics. Sometimes people are going a bit far and the wines are ending up a little bit reductive. A bit of flint is nice, but when it starts to taste like a box of struck matches, that's going a bit far. But generally, the quality of New Zealand Chardonnay is exceptional. And when I look at, I don't know if you know, but I write for Vinous, and when I look at my top scoring wines, Chardonnay always features very prominently in terms of averages. So I urge you to go out and explore New Zealand Chardonnay. There are so many different expressions. You get you get a little bit softer expression in the Hawke's whereas you get the much tighter expressions in Marlborough, for example. But I think that there is an increasingly clever and sophisticated Chardonnays that are being made. I mean, if you've got somebody who's coming in the coming months, and they typically will go in and come and buy a Pouilly Frisé, or they might be looking at a Village Burgundy, I really would say, money would be better spent buying good New Zealand Chardonnay. So it's not all Sauvignon Blanc and it's not all Chardonnay. There is a whole slew of white varieties as well. Look at those. So if you have ever called New Zealand a one-trick pony, which I might have done in about 2007 when I was writing for Harper's, mea culpa, apologies to the New Zealand wine industry, then I think New Zealand it is a one-trick pony. Look at all the lovely white varieties that you could have. Even Ostiner. Who's tasted New Zealand Ostiner? Anyone? Put your hands up. No. It's only Ripon that makes it down in Central Otago. So it is a little niche, but there you are. But as you can see, New Zealand makes a whole variety of white wines. And while the rats and mice aren't going to be taking over the ship anytime soon, there is more to explore. I think one of the great things about, one of the things that you can see is lots of these are aromatic, they're fresh, they're fruity, generally unoaked. And for the typical New Zealand wine drinker Sauvignon Blanc drinker, if you want to move them onto something else, typically they're fresh, fruity, and they're unoaked. So it isn't that big a step particularly for say Albarino or Gruner Veltliner. Yeah, they do have different aromatic profiles, perhaps different mouthfeels, but yes, in terms of that fruity fresh, we're in the right place. Now, Pinot Gris is the fourth most planted grape variety in New Zealand, and if you seek out some really nice, typically they have a little bit of RS, but the natural acidity of New Zealand should cut through that. Typically, the most interesting ones have some time on lees and are potentially fermented in old oak barrels. But for those wanting sort of a more straight style, you can also. Most of them are labelled as Pinot Gris, but some of them are actually slightly in a sort of a Grigio style. They're going for clean purity, preserving the fruit and the freshness, and tending more towards the drier styles, even if it does say grey on the label. Yeah, good luck selling Riesling and Gewürztraminer. I wish you all the best. But yeah, I mean, Albarino and Gruner Veltliner are like 0.1% of the New Zealand crush at the moment, but they are causing a big splash. The vines are young at the moment, but I think it just adds an extra layer of interest to the New Zealand offering at the moment. So if you've got any on your list, you know, why don't you just, yeah, buy the club. Sort of doing sampling is a great way to do this, or slipping in a 11+1 on a case of Sauvignon might be a good way to do it. I'm not telling you how to run your business. You might know better than I do. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour through New Zealand whites. Turns out New Zealand makes red wines as well. It's come to my attention. So we're going to have a little talk about Pinot Noir. I'm sure that you've all tasted New Zealand Pinot Noir before. If not, this is a really great opportunity to start. Now, New Zealand Pinot Noir is the most planted red grape variety in New Zealand. And excuse me. But once again, it's a very recent entrance. Burgundy's obviously had plenty of time perfecting its skills, and whereas Central Otago, which is now known for making Pinot Noir, didn't make its first Pinot until 1987. In fact, 30 years ago in 1990, if you'd looked at the New Zealand Wine Association's statistics for the year, there was actually more Reichensteiner, there was more Chasselas, and there was more Palomino planted in New Zealand in 1990 than there was Pinot Noir. So we've come quite a long way. The story begins in 1976 in Auckland. So the first Pinot Noir was planted in Auckland in 1976, but no, generally the North Island is too warm to make fine Pinot Noir. The Wairarapa, which is a very southern tip of the North Island, is the only exception. But I'd say the Wairarapa, which includes Martinborough, is actually has more in common with Marlborough and the South Island in terms of climate than it does with Hawke's Bay. So yeah, you're not going to see a lot of wines from the warmer climate of Pinots from the warmer climates of New Zealand, all about the cold climate, because Pinot Noir is an early ripening variety, and to get the most out of early ripening varieties, you need to have a cool climate so that it can preserve its acidity and develop some interest in terms of complexity of aromas and such like. So where does it flourish? It flourishes in, well, as I say, it's in Central Otago, but in the South Island mainly. If we start from the North Island, where Martinborough is, what is typical of a Martinborough or a Wairarapa Pinot Noir? It's very windy in the Wairarapa and in Martinborough, so your yields are typically very small. Like shoots can snap in the spring, and it is also prone to frost. Yeah, so as I say, yields are typically small in Martinborough, and because of the winds that blow throughout the season, you always get small yields and very small berries, but the very small berries are often thick-skinned to protect it against those, because of the winds and because of the intense sunlight, tiny berries. So you've got lots of skin to juice ratio. So typically a Martinborough or Wairarapa Pinot is going to be quite intense. You're going to have low yields, so you're going to always have quite high concentration. You are going to have quite a deep colour with good tannin, good savoury tannins. That's a typical character of Martinborough Pinot Noir, is they are typically more savoury than you will see in lots of other parts of the country. Generally, quality is very high in these regions partly because of those low yields. It costs a lot of money to make wine in Martinborough, and generally the producers are very small, so you're getting a lot of TLC. You're heading a bit further south, you're going into Marlborough. Now, Marlborough, as it is the biggest wine region in New Zealand, is necessarily the biggest producer of Pinot. It might not be known as well known for its Pinot, but things are greatly improving. I moved there in 2009 and lived there for 6 years, and in that period I went from hating Marlborough Pinot Noir to loving it. You really need to sort of scratch beneath the surface when it comes to Marlborough Pinot Noir, because lots of the Marlborough Pinot Noir that you see on, say, supermarket shelves at 10 to 15 quid is made on the alluvial valley floor, which is not typically a great place to be making Pinot, quite frankly. Fresh, fruity, vibrant, that's what you're going to get from Marlborough Pinot Noir off the valley floors. You know, sub 15 quid ones, they're going to be great. You can even slightly chill them. They're great for summer, but they ain't going to give you a great deal of depth and complexity. Where the excitement is coming in Marlborough is from what's called the Southern Valleys, and they're actually the hillside vineyards, and they are not on these gravelly riverbeds. They're actually on sort of clay loam soils, richer, deeper soils, giving wines with greater weight, greater complexity. And you're seeing a lot more experimentation at the moment with clones. You're seeing a lot more experimentation with sensitive winemaking as well. So we're seeing little bits of whole bunch here and there, little bits of really pulling back on the oak, because the vines are becoming older as well, particularly in the Southern Valleys. No one could plant in the Southern Valleys until the early 2000s because there was no water there. You can't establish vineyards unless you have water. And then in 2004, they established an irrigation scheme for the Southern Valleys. Suddenly, vine growing was actually a viable option there. And so since then, there's been quite a lot of planting. The vines are now starting to reach maturity. When the vines reach maturity, they give natural tannin in terms of their skins and their seeds. So you don't need to add tannin through oak barrels. So we're seeing lots of people pulling back on oak in Marlborough on these top sites, and we are seeing some really beautiful expressions. So Marlborough can produce your fresh, fruity styles that are open and just really easy drinking, soft, easy drinking Pinot that's affordable, but it's also starting to produce some excellent wines that are really ones to watch. Like watch out the rest of the South Island, because the rest of the South Island has had kind of a bit of a monopoly on the top top Pinots. Like Central Otago has become known for its Pinots. They're much deeper in colour, and that's because when you get to Central Otago, the reason why you've got these wines that are much bolder than the rest of New Zealand is because you're in a sort of a semi-continental climate. In Central Otago, you're in sort of a little bubble that's surrounded by mountains. Great place to go skiing, as well as make Pinot. And you're in this bubble. So if you're having a really terrible year, perhaps on the coast, you're getting hit with rain, it can be dry as a bone. Like some people, when you read a vintage report in New Zealand, Central Otago always seems to be very different to the rest of the country. So always if they do a vintage report that's just about the country, take it with a pinch of salt, because Central Otago is its own little place entirely. What's interesting about here is that you do start to have real big temperature differences between the day and the night. So not only are you getting really ripe fruit during the day in this hot bubble in the middle of the mountains, you're also getting very cold nights. It can be 30 degrees during the day, and it can fall as low as 0 in the summer at night. So you're getting this really great ripening during the day, but then at night you get this preservation of acidity, keeping that real fruit vibrancy, but also you're keeping the wines really fresh. Also, because of that big diurnal temperature differences, you're going to see the wines are a lot deeper in colour as well. In the early 2000s, we're seeing quite a lot of really oaky wines, almost like Barossa type Pinots. But the winemakers in the last decade are really pulling back on that, trying to make much more sensitive wines, pulling back on the oak, pulling back on the ripeness. So they are picking earlier to preserve the even more freshness. Whereas 14.5 alcohols, what might have been the norm 10, 15 years ago, we're now looking more at 13.5. I could go on about that all day, but I think it's really interesting to know that, when you think about Central Otago, there's this big splash about it, but it represents 3% of New Zealand's vineyards. 3% of New Zealand's vineyard, and New Zealand only represents 0.1% of the world's vineyards. And then think about how much coverage it receives in terms of the media and stuff. It really has put itself on the Pinot map. There's, I don't know whether you ever know of Burgundy's Georges Comte de Vogüé, from Chambol, but the winemaker from there, Francois Millet, now makes wine in Central Otago with Prophets Rock as well. So there's clearly something that has captured the world's eyes. Lots of regional variation in Pinot. Lots of regional variation. So it's not, when you talk about New Zealand Pinot Noir, it's not just one size fits all, which is quite interesting. Next, I'm going to talk not about Pinot Noir, because it's not all Pinot Noir. There are other red varieties in New Zealand too. Who knew? These are, I appreciate these are more of a difficult sell. When people think about New Zealand, they think about Sauvignon Blanc, and then they go, oh, Pinot Noir as well. Okay, which is, you know, sometimes an eye opener for people. But on the North Island, as we saw from Hawke's Bay and above, it's actually quite a much warmer climate than you would get on the South Island. So we can ripen other varieties. For example, Syrah and Bordeaux blends are great. They grow really well in Hawke's Bay and on Waiheke Island, which is, as I said earlier, 40 minutes ferry ride from the CBD in Auckland. I think there is, as I say, I think there is this misconception of all of New Zealand being a cool climate. The average temperature in, say, Hawke's Bay is sort of around 19, 20 degrees in the summer, whereas in Marlborough, it's more like 13. So big differences. It's on the same latitude as, say, Ibiza and Sardinia in Hawke's Bay. But as I say, the cooling influences of the Pacific make it much cooler than its latitude would suggest. Now, Hawke's Bay is where we're probably going to focus. It's where 80% of all Bordeaux production is, and it's similar for Syrah as well. I think it's about 75% of all Syrah plantings are planted in Hawke's Bay. As I say, there's a little bit planted in Waiheke Island. You don't see a lot of it being exported. Most of it gets consumed by the close to 1 million tourists that it receives to its cellar doors each year, or by wedding parties. And there is a little bit of Syrah and Cabernet planted on the South Island, but it doesn't succeed every year because of that cool climate. Now, obviously, the promotion is occurring during the Easter to June period. So, you know, Bordeaux blends, let's talk about them. Fleshy but fine. So because we're in the new world, because we're in a warm, sunny climate with lots of sunlight out, we're going to get lovely, ripe vibrancy of fruit, really juicy blackberries, for example, really juicy plums that you might not see in terms of, you know, you might see in a warm vintage from, say, Pomerol or Zandemelian. But yeah, you're seeing much fleshy. But we're seeing, obviously, we've got this cooler. Still in terms of Bordeaux varieties, it's still a fairly marginal place. So we're always retaining that acidity. Typically, Merlot has been the lead variety in these Bordeaux blends because it ripens earlier than Cabernet, and, you know, it is on the margins of getting these varieties right. As a result, you typically see Merlot dominant blend. However, in recent years, actually, the harvest which takes place for these Bordeaux blends is in sort of March and into early April. And in middle of March, in recent years, there has been quite a bit of rain. For example, in 2018, so Cabernet Sauvignon with its thicker, more resilient skins, its later ripening cycle, has meant that Cabernet Sauvignon is starting to fall into favour with people because it's actually going through those March rains and going into April still intact, no problems at all. And there have been a few 100% Cabernets coming out of New Zealand in the past few years because of these climatic occurrences. So you might see some 100% Cabernet, and that's a reflection of the vintage. If you get a really nice long dry April, but when they're picking, you can see that. We'll see, it depends on each year, but yeah, I'd say Merlot has been the traditional one, but Cabernet is on the way up. As I say, it's Easter. Lots of people are going to be having lamb, and I think that while it'd be really interesting for traditional Bordeaux drinkers or people who are looking for a Bordeaux blend, potentially to look at some Bordeaux blends from New Zealand. So similar climate as Bordeaux, but with a bit more juicy fruit. Also Syrah, which I make no excuses for, that I am always banging on about New Zealand Syrah. For me, New Zealand Syrah is the most distinctive, the most distinctive variety that comes out of New Zealand, and is off. But although it's in an MW exam 2 or 3 years ago, most of the candidates put the 2 New Zealand Hawke's Bay Syrahs in the Northern Rhone and said they were very good, which they were. It's called Syrah rather than Shiraz because these wines are in a more of a Rhone style than a Barossa style. If your customer is coming in and saying, I like Shiraz from the Barossa, maybe New Zealand Syrah isn't for them. These are not 14.5% juicy, jammy blockbusters with loads of American oak, I'm afraid. These are our liberal vanilla on them. These are restrained. They are slightly earthy, spicy. They always retain that nice blackberry New World fruit, but they also retain lots of acidity. 13 or 13.5% alcohol wines is what you kind of get when it comes to Syrah. What I love about these wines is also you get that nice peppery character, which is called a compound called Rotundo, and that you often see in the Northern Rhone. This is Syrah on the edge. When you get Syrah on the edge, you typically retain that slightly black peppery character. You might see that smoky bacon character as well, and I think that really distinguishes it. Bright fruit, but you also get the spicy savoury notes too. Rotundo is quite a powerful compound. If you dropped a milliliter of it in a 50-meter Olympic swimming pool, the Olympic swimming pool would smell peppery. Although 1 in 5 of us has anosmia for this compound, so if you can't smell it, you might have anosmia. This is not. So yeah, 4 out of 5 of us can smell it in Syrah, but 1 out of 5 of us can't. I think anosmia before COVID came along, very few people knew what anosmia was, but now everyone seems to know what it is, so I can just use it liberally. I think that's very much a whistle-stop tour of New Zealand. Obviously, none of us can go to New Zealand unless we spend 2 weeks in quarantine at the moment. So let's just look at some really pretty pictures instead of New Zealand, and let's sell some New Zealand wine together. I think that one of the reasons I read recently in Forbes, one of the ways you can feel like you're going somewhere is through tasting wines. And I think the wines of New Zealand, whether it's the luminosity of the Sauvignon Blancs or it's the savouriness and the spiciness of the Hawke's Bay Syrahs, I think that this is the only way to have a taste of travel at the moment. So perhaps that's a nice way to perhaps that's a nice thing to think about when we're selling and doing the promotion together. That through drinking New Zealand wines, we can go on a journey together, whether it's in Auckland, Hawke's Bay, Marlborough, or Central Otago. If anyone has any more questions, please do put them on there. Chris is just gonna now round up the presentation and just to remind you all about what the materials that he has available for you are. If you have any questions, I'm going to sit on here while he speaks. And thank you very much for your attention on this Wednesday morning. My voice managed to hold out for the time. And yeah, I hope that you enjoyed it and you learned something. If you've got any more questions, you can reach me. I'm Rebecca at rebeccagibb.com if you've got any more questions, or you can ask them on here. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I might need you to just, run through the presentation. That was really interesting, really good to get all that detail. Fantastic. And everything else. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me, Rebecca?
Yes, I can hear you perfect.
Okay, good. I hope everyone else can. So yeah, obviously I've spoken to the independent retailers about this. The promotion period is from any time from April to June, but you can run it for 2 weeks through that time, which is fantastic. Can you scroll through the prezzo? Yeah. So obviously the aim is to show the country's diversity. So we're looking for you to have at least 6 different wines, whether it be regions, varieties, or styles. Rebecca mentioned about Anzac Day, which is a really good point. But there's Sauvignon Blanc Day as well on Friday, May the 7th. So there's some POS that's been created for that, as you know. So that's really good. Rebecca, next slide, please.
Sorry, I'm having to do the Chris Whitty here, aren't I? Next slide, please.
Yeah, just run through it. So basically, we're offering 3 retailers to win £1,000 worth of New Zealand wines from your suppliers, which is great. But also, we're offering your customers. So there's comp slips that go out, and there's a QR code which you can put by your tills, just to, the customers can scan it, and you can win, or they can win 10 prizes worth of £100 of wine, which we will purchase from you if their name comes out of the hat and they've named you as the winner. So that's great. For the actual entry, deadline is 30th of July. Winners notified by end of September. T's and C's and everything else on that link. Basically, we're just looking for you to show New Zealand, take people on a journey. I appreciate it's very hard to do in-store tastings. In fact, it's impossible to do in-store tastings at the moment. But maybe there's some information through newsletters, through social media posts, through samples in store, displays, just brings to life New Zealand. And what Rebecca said, maybe you can look at some different wines to show and do some special offers, case offers, and things like that, like maybe a special package.
Yeah, and I know lots of people. There are lots of New Zealand reps in the country, like lots of people who represent the wineries. Get them to come and do stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this promotion can run to the end of June, so by mid-June, you might be able to actually do something. And final slide, Rebecca. So the POS kits are going out this week, hopefully. We've got a separate sort of little kit which you can show for Sauvignon Blanc Day that weekend, if you want, or so forth. And then there's digital POS available, banners, web buttons, also including the consumer call to action with winner case, which you can stick on your websites and so forth. If you are doing any posts, do use #NZ1, #NZ Made with Care, and tag us so we can follow you. We will be promoting everyone that's involved in the promotion on our website. We'll have a link and we'll put it out on our social media. So do send me your logos of your stores, so then we can essentially link so people can click on your logo, which will then link to your website as well. So we want to push you and push New Zealand as much as possible. But anyway, if you've got any questions about the promotion, please get in touch with me. And if you've got any questions about New Zealand, please get in touch with Rebecca. I was wondering if there's any more questions that have come through on that. I think it's all saying how great it was, which it was. Rebecca is a fantastic person. If you haven't got her book, I would highly recommend getting it. In your POS kits, you will be getting a guide to New Zealand, which really goes into much more detail. All the other regions. There's some fantastic wines from North Canterbury, from Nelson as well. Look at the wider regions as well as Central and Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. There's some fantastic alternative varieties coming through. Organic, biodynamic producers. There's a lot of stories going on about New Zealand. So hope you will have fun discovering. Thank you very much, and thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. Okay, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.